Thank you. So, as you might have noticed, I am dressed up as Batgirl, or Leppakonainen in Finnish. And I'm doing this because, well, it's Thursday. I guess everyone is tired, and I'm hoping to make this presentation more fun this way. So, So I'm speaking about the role of gamification in participatory environmental sensing, and I'm going to be speaking about a study we ran last year in a small community in Finland. So to start with, I would like to ask you, have you ever heard of participatory sensing or environmental sensing? Could you raise your hands if you're familiar with the topic? Okay, so I don't have much to say in here, except that participatory sensing has seen a spike of initiatives around the planet since around 10 years ago. And those initiatives are very often around the topic of environmental monitoring. However, many of those initiatives are actually started by researchers or city councils, they are dying after very short periods of time, especially because people does not engage in the long term. And environmental sensing can be done with a very broad range of technologies, starting with technologies such as interactive voice responders, going up to sensors that people can carry around so that they can measure, for example, radiation or issues in their surroundings. And of course, all of those sort of technologies vary on the way that people can interact or use. It has been accepted, or it has been said by United Nations, that environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all sorry, something happened here, of all concerned citizens. Oh, okay, sorry, my presentation crashed. Oops. But that's not a problem for Batman, right? So here we are. So United Nations has accepted that environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens. And these particular sort of applications, participatory sensing applications, are very useful to support the participation of citizens, not only in monitoring issues and telling us what's happening around, but also in providing information about the possible solutions for those issues. Why? Because citizens have the local knowledge that very often scientists or local city councils lack of. So, to get you in the context of why we did this research, we did it because we noticed that there is at the moment some sort of inconclusive research in the field, particularly because there are arguments on both sides. There are arguments that say that we should not use gamification as a mean for trying to engage people, because gamification only tries to enhance non-pro-environmental behavior because it activates negative values. However, we have the very same arguments on the other side of the research at the moment, and there is some researchers that are saying that gamification can motivate and enhance actions. It can also impact intrinsic motives that can be used step by step to actually enhance an intrinsic and long-term change. And also there has been some examples like Foldit. Foldit has engaged over 200,000 people in solving some puzzles, and they are doing science day to day, and well, there is a large pool of examples in there. So we decided that as there are arguments on both sides, we wanted to carry an empirical study to see what we could find. So our main research question was what are the effects of gamification mechanisms on the user engagement and user experience in an environmental sensing application. So we decided that we would apply this in a lake we have in the city where our university is based. This is the Saimaa Lake. It's the fourth largest lake in Europe. It's the largest lake in Finland. And this lake is frozen from December to April. During that period of time, a lot of people does a lot of winter activities, and it's a lovely place where also this beautiful creature lives. And in case you don't know, that creature is the Saimaa ringed seal, and it exists only in that lake. So that lake starts melting somewhere in May, and the time or period where that lake has started melting has been changing a lot in the past 10 years because of climate change. So we wanted to involve people in monitoring the ice status of this lake, particularly during May, because that's a period when the ice goes away, and it's a period where people can go and they can fall in the lake, they can drown. So it's information that is important, and satellites at the moment do not have the full terrestrial information about the status of the ice. So, and well, as you can probably imagine, this lake is huge. So having people going around and monitoring the ice was something that could be helpful. So what we did was that we designed 2 applications. Both applications had for goal monitoring the status of the ice in the lake. And one application had some gamification elements infused, and the other didn't. Both applications looked quite similar, except for the gamification elements. And we recruited 41 participants, which we divided in 2 groups. And they were doing this experiment, or were doing this monitoring for 20 days. So, as I was saying, we recruited 41 volunteers, which were for between 20 years old to 35 years old. We did not give any type of incentive, nor money, prizes, or anything to them. So this was like very intrinsic motivated people that wanted to do this activity. And we collected data about different things. We collected data about usability, satisfaction, acceptance, and playfulness. And we did this with pre and post questionnaires that were actually based on standardized scales that are already quite used in the HCI community. And we also used the Mann-Whitney U-test for analyze the difference of means in our data. So, what did we find? So, first, in terms of user engagement, we know that user engagement has some different definitions depending on with whom you talk, if you talk with software engineers or HCI people. So what we did was that we defined engagement for this particular study as the involvement, the total amount of submissions, the activeness, how often they are using our application, and the dropout. So we had 2 interesting findings in terms of involvement and activeness. However, in dropout, there was not a major difference, so I didn't consider relevant to put it in the presentation. And you can check the paper for more details. Of course, there was basically both applications had the very same number of dropouts. However, in terms of involvement, there were 71% more submissions from the gamified users, and that was something that happened across the 20 days. As you can probably see, the orange line is the gamified application, and the participants were constantly like using the application with some peaks and some downs as well. And this also was shown in our qualitative data, which kind of showed that the non-gamified application users said that they found the application easy to use and useful, but the users that use the gamified application also found it interesting and fun. And for example, one of the participants said, "It was fun and the desire to submit observations incentivized me to walk more." So I would say that it's useful not only for lakes, but also for people. And this was in terms of involvement. In activeness, so in activeness, we were measuring how active people was in terms of like, were they submitting at least one observation during this participation, or if they were submitting more observations kind of like often. So from the non-gamified application, we had 20 users, out of which 18 of them submitted at least once an observation, and 3 of them were very active. On the other hand, in a gamified application, we had 21 users, out of which 20 were active and 10 of them were very active. This shows that half of them were actually very active. So there is already quite interesting insights in here on like the effect that gamification can have. In terms of the user experience, however, we had these measures. We had learnability, effectiveness, and satisfaction, which we measure in terms of how usable is this application and how satisfied you are with it. We found that there was only an insightful difference on the effectiveness, because the learnability, which we measured at the beginning of the study when users were exposed to the application for the first time, we measured how much time they spent learning the application. There was only 1 second of difference, so it was not very significant. And which was very, very surprising for us was that actually the satisfaction was the same. So there was a minimum difference, and that was really interesting because apparently users perceived both applications as usable and as friendly as they were. However, in terms of effectiveness, there was something interesting, that the non-gamified application had about 36% of effectiveness ratio. However, the gamified application was twice that amount. So as I said in here, apparently the people that was using the gamified application was getting shit done. So what were the gamification elements that that were like the most interesting for people. We try to see what caused the behavior, and we did this from our qualitative data. So apparently the leaderboard was the most popular feature. We had some interesting stories in the leaderboard. People was competing with each other, online and offline. And also people had noticed quite heavily the progress tab and also the educational content, which we presented to them as a form of a story. So the application in short was, the gamified application would be, you had a story that would present you of the issues with lake monitoring and why it is important. Once you finish the story, you had a challenge to submit 20 observations in 20 days, and then you would have just a very basic application sort of Instagram where you could submit photos and classify what was the state of the ice. And the non-gamified application had the very same logic, and both applications had access to statistics of the lake, the ice status on the lake. So in terms of enjoyment, both groups found the applications a good idea, interesting, liked to use it, enjoyable. However, the group that used the gamified application found it slightly more fun. And that's something that, that we found also in the qualitative data, this thing. And then also in terms of playfulness, we asked participants to characterize themselves when they were using the applications, and the people that use the gamified application characterize themselves as more spontaneous and playful, and the ones who use the non-gamified actually said that they felt more flexible when they were using the application, but they both felt equally creative. So, as a wrap-up of all the things I have been saying here, what we found was that we were able to achieve higher user engagement by using the gamification mechanisms. Also, we managed to increase the awareness and education, and we could notice this from the qualitative data. People started saying, hey, I think this is important, this is an important issue, I agree with monitoring ice, I think this is useful for this and that. So, that was interesting, and also we managed to achieve more submissions due to the gamification with the same user experience. So some of the reflections I have, the things we learned from this study have been that first, the data, or basically the data that we have from the user experience and the user behavior tell us very different things. So on one hand, the user experience was the same, but they were much more effective. And that is in a way also creepy, because in a way shows that gamification could be used to, for example, boost some behaviors that without the participants really noticing them. So however, in this sort of applications, the behavior desired is something that in general should be good for the community. Another thing that we learned is that gamification elements are not plug-and-play compatible, and I think this is very in line with the talks from yesterday in this session as well. Gamification depends on a specific mixture and preparation of the system, which cannot be deconstructed and measure individual elements alone. So a game like system has to be fun, and there is a limit for this deconstruction. So we would really like to highlight that gamification is about experiences, not elements. In terms of the design reflections, we learned some things. First, we suggest to people designing these sort of applications for environmental sensing to support personalized notification triggers. We noticed that some of our participants really like to be notified after every submission they could have made. However, other participants really hated the notifications, and that's probably because, well, different people has different tastes, right? So we should have some sort of like support for this sort of customization. Also, we noticed that some users were very motivated by the leaderboard, and they wanted to compete, and they wanted to be on the top, and they were trying to just like win each other. However, the users that would be on the bottom, they would not feel at all interested on competing, because, well, they were already on the bottom. What was the goal then, right? So there should be a support for customizable challenges to avoid these negative feelings, so that people who wants to play can play, and people who doesn't want to play, they cannot play, and they also are rewarded with the things they consider valuable for their type of player. So another thing, try to support interaction between users. And this was actually from a very interesting experience we had, because our users had avatars in the leaderboard, and they had uploaded their photos. And some of them, well, we live in a small town, some of them knew each other. So they had taken the competition offline, and they were competing against each other and trying to beat each other all the time. And I think that boosted a lot the competition. And that's something that also Pokemon Go does. Pokemon Go has these legendary Pokemons in the Pokestops that a bunch of people has to go, and they have to get together. So these sort of social interactions offline should also be taken into account when designing these sort of applications. Another thing is to allow users explore the submitted data and to make sense out of it, because sometimes users might have some uses for the data that we as scientists are not aware of. Another thing, enhancing their experiences, because during our study, the temperatures varied between -5 and 12, and this meant that a lot of the users would not feel comfortable walking around the lake. It was certainly not the temperature that everyone would be running around. So this is something that it's important, so that, for example, participants who are indoors can also perform some tasks. Classification or verification tasks could be probably the most appropriate for those. And also support interactive feedback. And we noticed that many of our participants had many ideas about how we could improve the application. They had ideas about challenges, they had ideas about features that we could improve, features that we could add. And this shows that users are ready to start co-creating things with us. They already have a lot of experience from their previous applications and from the things they have used. So it's a good time to kind of like think, how are we going to help them, giving us feedback while they use these applications. Very fast. So we have some limitations as any other study. We had a small sample. The study was short, and we would like to have more qualitative data. And also we did not measure the individual game elements and their effect on behavior. So to wrap up my presentation, I will just end up saying that at the moment we are running another initiative with about 100 citizens in the same town, and we are trying to measure how the engagement changes and over time, over 3 months actually, and we are also trying to see whether workshops that allow them to co-create applications with us would change the way they behave when they use these sort of systems. So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jenny Priest from the University of Maryland. Thank you for a very nice talk. Did you tell us what the demographic breakdown of your participants is? I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I did not break down that, yeah. But we had, if I'm not mistaken, around 40% women and 60% men, yeah. And they were all between 25 and 35 years old.
Yeah. The reason I ask that is that, and incidentally, I was really happy to see that that you're going to allow people to customize the leaderboards, because the reason I asked my question is that there's some evidence, and I can't remember the name of the paper, that leaderboards tend to inhibit women more than men. They tend to inhibit older people's participation more than younger people. So you may want to take that into account. I've forgotten the papers, but there's definitely interesting papers on that, because many people tend to just jump to the idea of leaderboards, and they're not always helpful to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's something that we realized during the study, that leaderboards are not helpful for everybody, and that there's people that simply does not want to play, and they might not be enhanced by leaderboards. However, in our study, actually, the competition that wasn't like this offline competition was actually happening with a group of women. It was a group of women who were competing, and they met outdoors. So that was something interesting. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. The leaderboard has a double blade effect.
And my second question, will you be studying bats in the summer?
I don't think so, but I will think about it.
Hi there, Alina, also from University of Maryland. I was curious, you briefly mentioned talking about educational content and that you provided them with a narrative. And I'm curious, actually, what kind of education content did you provide to support this sort of observation work? And then how did you structure it with a narrative?
Well, We provided them 2 types of educational content. One was within the application, and that was basically a story about climate change and how climate change is changing the way the ice on the lake is kind of like melting and when it's melting. And then we also provided them in the pre-survey with some information about the ice status, and we tried to educate them. What does it mean? Thin ice, what does it mean thick ice? And we provided them with photos, and basically that was kind of like the narrative we provided.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.